Let's jump into, introductions. My name is Ammar. I'm one of the co-hosts of Asians Represent and one of the cast members and players in Dungeons and Asians. And I'm facilitating today. And I think you can, if you want to sort of give me a Twitter follow, you can do that on the dibbly-doo just below my picture here, or it's at Ammar Ijaz, or you can find it most easily through the at AZNS Represent Twitter. Next up, Iza, would you like to tell the wonderful folks out there how wonderful you are?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Iza, and I go by Evil Clever Dog on Twitter and Instagram, and you can also subscribe to me under the same username on YouTube. I'm a cosplayer and designer and TTRPG streamer, and I also make cosplay and crafting videos on YouTube. I'll talk more about that at the end.
Yeah, those are really, really cool. Adam Ali, would you like to give us a sense of who you are and what your deal is? Other than you're floating in space, I guess.
Yes, I'm constantly floating in space, really. It's how 2021 is working out for me. Hi, my name is Adam Ali. I'm also known under my pen name, Nurdin Ali Kadir. I'm a TTRPG streamer, writer, advocate, cultural consultant, and whatever this is. Super excited to be here as always, but mostly because the company's great, not necessarily because the book is.
That's right. I believe Adam Ali's business card is about the size of a postcard.
Yes.
Mariam, would you please like to tell us about yourself?
So I am a streamer, podcaster, freelance writer, cultural consultant, and a whole other laundry list of things. But currently I seem to be doing a lot of freelance writing. I wrote for Thirsty Sword Lesbians, as well as for Baisa Mwangi Expanse. And I am also the co-admin of Utopia, which is a BIM POC channel for BIM POC. And I can go on, but we'll just go to the next person.
Oh, right. I'm one of the organizers for Utopia too, right?
Don't you also do that other convention?
Yeah, that's
bunch of things you do.
Oh yeah, I just casually forgot another one of my many hats. It's fine.
I have a closet full of hats.
Back off. Hats are my game, okay?
Clothes.
Amr, please tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Amr Emraz. I exist liminally in the corners of TTRPG space where I occasionally pop out to do writing, podcasting, streaming, and yell about random things. Currently, my Twitter account has nominally been converted into an Akudama Drive fan account because it's a wonderful cyberpunk show that says ACAB consistently. So that's it. That's who I am. Hello.
Wonderful. Ahmed, please tell the wonderful folks about yourself.
Hello, my name is Ahmed, and I share whatever tidbits from Arabic culture I could remember at the time. And I translate, I do cultural consulting, and I have made, with the help of my community, an Arabic SRD 5e OGL, anyway, compatible D&D. So because we want people to start playing the game, so we made our own version and we named it Fantasy Weave. And now we are working on creating a whole open source world so people can just start playing.
Whoa, that's fantastic.
Until they officially make an Arabic version.
That's fantastic. I assume that might be slightly better than Sahara's setting to play in, considering it's made by actual people from something like that region. And I think probably with that bit of snark, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Iza to provide us with the content warning. And unfortunately, there will be some challenging material here, as there often is, and we've all kind of tried to gather up our spoons for today.
So we always give a content warning before each of these streams, but we sometimes add new things in, so do pay attention. Today we want to give a content warning for Islamophobia and racism, of course, but also slavery, sexism, classism, and honor killings. So yeah, if any of those topics are uncomfortable or triggering for you to hear about, remember that there will be a VOD, so you can catch up later, watch it in little bits, so you can sort of like disperse it out and make it easier viewing for yourself. And of course, we all take care of ourselves, so you don't need to worry about us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I will sort of check in for a break about midway through just to make sure. And of course, as Iza hinted, we have our own, I guess, something like safety tools as well as we go into these discussions. Thank you. In terms of general approach, I would like to, as I as I am wont to do. Start off by reading a tweet from DM Steve reflecting on his experience doing the Asians read on the Oriental Adventures. So you can sub out kind of Al-Qadim for Oriental Adventures in this tweet. So for myself, I will go ahead and say my approach goes broadly like this. Quote, Oriental Adventures is bad. It has a lot of problems and reinforces harmful stereotypes. But just because I can connect the text to real-world racism, it doesn't mean that if you enjoy these books, you are racist. It means you have the capacity to support Asian stories. And that's kind of the perspective that I'm bringing into my reading of this. And generally speaking, my interpretive frame is based on Orientalism by Edward Said, the seminal text. And I was trained in just enough philosophy to be kind of very capital C charitable. I'm not trying to see the authors as bad people, just trapped in their own frameworks that is very hard for them to get out of. Any other general notes? We've been doing this for, I think, a year at this point. So maybe some refreshers or reminders would be good too. What are your approaches? How are you coming to this text, basically?
The thing I always like to iterate is that it's important to be critical of things you enjoy as well as things you don't enjoy. And while we may not necessarily enjoy this specific book most of the time, we are all people who enjoy TTRPGs and to an extent D&D, and therefore our reasons for criticizing it are not purely just to eliminate D&D from the face of the earth as if we have the power to do that. It's because we want this space to become more understanding and inclusive and not potentially harmful for people like us to be in. And that's why we're doing this, or at least that's why I'm doing this.
I'm doing this because this is one part of my very multifaceted cultural identity. And, like, this book kind of, on one hand, kind of mashes every single Islamic culture into one sort of ball and calls it Arabian, and on the other hand also kind of I lost my train of thought, but it's just like, for me, I can't really find an adventure setting that, especially South Asian fantasy setting, that also includes a lot of the culture that, the Mughal and also Muslim influences that are there. So this is where I can find it. And it's not even that great, like the way it's written.
I agree. General approaches?
I'm just doing this for fun.
You have a different idea of fun than I do.
No, I'm doing this to both encourage conversation, but also I want to acknowledge the time in which this was written, the place in which it was written, and who the intended audience was for, while criticizing why those things are probably the wrong starting point to build something like this off of. Plus, like, part of me really does, at this point, we've been in this for so long, part of me is like, one, I want to see this through, and two, I want to see what's good about it. I want to like end this thinking, I like that. I haven't gotten there yet. I'm being honest. I'm not, like, this is not jokey to me because that's really sad in my mind, but one day we'll get there. And I look forward to that. By the time we get to the kit descriptions, I get some cool stuff I'm excited about.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, and I mean, I hope that sort of the diversity of even sort of approaches to the text might give a sense of something that, not to pull the curtain back too much, but when Daniel Kwan and I were talking about doing this, we wanted to counter the sort of melange, throw it all together into a big pot characteristic of Orientalist text by having a diversity of people from many different of the cultures that are sort of being used or being, I guess, maybe plundered for inspiration in this text, so that we could have these different perspectives on it. So that's, that was really important to us to start with, and that is the important part of this, is that diversity is important, basically.
Then there's me, who's absolutely enjoying Zahara. It needs a lot of fixing, but I absolutely love it. It just needs work. It has the flaws of its times, and they had no intention or any idea they were gonna market to Middle Easterns and Arabs at the time. So whatever is during the time, the mistakes they had, these were the times they were working with. These were the ideas that were predominant in their culture. But I can see the whole hard work that has been done there. And like so much so that my group right now, we're all Arabs. They want to wrap up Baldur's Gate as soon as possible so we can start Zahara, and I keep pushing them back because I still need to finish reading all the books.
I mean, so speaking of hard work, you're putting in the hard work to do that. You've been going through the text. You've occasionally shared some areas that are crossed out in red ink, and occasionally entire pages are crossed out in red ink that can't be redeemed. But I'm very excited to see what kind of comes out of your hard work on trying to, create something out of this. Yeah, and so I mean that's an important thing that you raised there, is that this was created by, I believe, somebody who is white and sort of American for a white, sort of Western audience. There wasn't that many, as far as I'm aware, there weren't that many people who were basically non-white men in the hobby at the time. But the part of the reason we're highlighting all these issues is so that these are sort of pitfalls that people can avoid falling into today. Unfortunately, people still are, and that's an important part of the mission, because otherwise we could just not stream this and sit at home and just have a video call and just do this. It's to kind of give guides to game designers and players and DMs as well about things to avoid doing in your own games. Number one, no accents. Never do an accent. Don't ever try to do an accent. Like, I don't try to do somewhat like a stereotypical South Asian accent. Like, that's just, don't do it. Partly because the only South Asian accent I can kind of credibly do is Apu, which was, it's not good.
Yeah, that's like, if you really want to reclaim your own, I've got a weird thing, because I sound very Western to most people listening. This is not the first way I learned how to speak English remotely. I learned it because I just stopped talking as a kid until I could figure out how to make myself sound like the students around me, because I was being bullied for 9/11, which I know that's a heavy thing to just drop in a conversation, but hey, that's life. So, like, I get the idea why some people, like, they take an accent that their parents have or their grandparents have, and they try and reclaim it for themselves through stuff like this. And I get that. I totally accept it. I think that the issue comes in when you start aping things that are not your own, and when you do it from a place of ignorance or control, right? Are you doing this accent for you, or are you doing it because it'd be funny? And I say that from an acting perspective too, because I did used to act. Oh God, that's another hat.
And
I'm suffering hats.
And
Go on,
also, like, for example, with South Asian accents, there's a multitude of accents that are there, and all you hear is this one particular Apu accent, which really erases, like, a Bengali speaker has a very different accent than a Gujarati, than a Rajasthani, a Mumbai, and even within Mumbai, there's like a multitude of accents depending on sort of your economic standing.
And just to underline the very basic thing, those are accents when people from those regions or those ethnic groups learn English. There's so many languages. Yeah, there's so many languages in South Asia. It's an enormous region. And the other thing I do want to make everybody aware, if they're not, is Apu is voiced by Hank Azaria, who, as you might guess, is not South Asian. So the accent is kind of meant to be a little bit comical as well. So obviously there was a documentary a couple of years ago now, or a few years ago. What's Wrong with Apu, or was it something like that? I didn't quite see it.
The Problem with Apu.
The Problem with Apu. Thank you. Yeah. So that kind of gets more into that. But anyway, shall we get into the? Oh, sorry, Ammar, please.
I guess the one thing I'd like to add, sort of to wrap that up, like, I think ultimately, the main way I sort of approach this book is as a jumping off point for a lot of the conversations, right? Because as sort of like what everyone said together, this book, a lot of what's in this book is the product of both its time and a lot of unexamined racism, bias, and in both like culture as a whole and on the part of people involved with it. However, a lot of that still exists, right? A lot of people, we have more resources, more voices calling for the examination of that, but a lot of people will still not do so. And so this serves as sort of a jumping off point for the examination of that in things you both enjoy and things you don't enjoy, and things you're working on and things you might be playing in. And so using that can help springboard that conversation and make folks aware of how it can permeate even the smallest decisions in your world building or your writing or what have you.
Definitely. And with that warning firmly in mind, let's look at the way that all of these things permeate this text. Shall we start with something we left as a bit of a cliffhanger at the end of last session, I guess, which was we had started to get into station in life. This is going to be a place where that classism content warning is going to be tapped a few times, I think. I think let's go in reverse order if it's okay today. Reverse initiative order. So Ahmed, if you wouldn't mind picking it up, we got to station in life. You can I guess reread the first paragraph, or you can just jump right into the second paragraph.
From improving or the beginning of the page?
So what we left off with specifically was on page 22, in gameplay, station is measured by a rating from 0 to 20. But you can read as much ahead of that as you'd like.
Oh, okay, I found it.
Yeah.
So in gameplay, station is measured by a rating from 0 to 20, with 0 being the most despicable outcast and 20 representing the most esteemed and worthy of caliphs. Most individuals remain close to their initial station. A man born to a baker's family tends to become a baker. A woman born to a caliph's harem remains within those circles for most of her life. However, adventurers and those who walk with fate will see their station rise and fall over time, according to their actions and abilities. The initial station of PCs is defined by their kits. Not all PCs have kits, but those who do are of equal station to PCs with the same role. Multi-class characters use the lower of their two stations. Characters who become dual class must have their station upon taking the second role. While they are allowed to play, multi and dual class characters are uncommon in Land of Fate. They tend to confuse those who are comfortable with the orderly nature of life in Zakhara. Many Zakharans feel that a change in career is acceptable, but little those who cannot commit to a path completely.
Okay.
Little those. All right.
I feel like there's probably some stuff in there.
Yeah.
A little bit, just a little bit.
Quite a bit, I think. Who would like to start? Who would like to jump in?
I can do it. So let me just dive in. First of all, they're using the word caliph again, and we've already mentioned multiple times why we're not a fan of that. We're going to get to other words we're probably not a fan of later. But keep that in mind. Caliph is not just a term of like significance culturally. It's a religious term. You need to be careful with that, especially when you're not representing Islam in this. But beyond that, so I'm going to say what I like first. And it's one sentence. Adventurers and those who walk with fate will see their station rise and fall over time according to their actions and abilities. That's cool, and that very much fits in with what D&D usually is, where people around you are relatively normal, but you and a couple NPCs are unique in a way because you're adventurers. So your fate is more undetermined than the rest. Your station will go high and then it will fall to the ground. Like, I do appreciate that. I do appreciate them specifying that. So that's nice. I don't know if they really needed to have the bits before then, but you know, I'll take what I can get. This dual class and multi-classing thing is actually worse than people think it is. Because if you're starting off as a foreigner, this is mentioned before, if you're starting off as a foreigner, you have the ability to multi-class into one of the kits in this book, which is kind of indicative, like you are learning from our culture, and now you're going to, you know, take a kit that is usually belonging to us, right? Because you've learned from someone in the area, which is really cool. I like this idea of someone coming from the outside, a wizard coming from the outside, and learning to become a Shayu because of it. That's great. But Now, if you do that, suddenly you're ridiculously undercut because your station goes down by half. And that's after your station is probably already relatively lower because you're not from the area. So for learning from our culture, we're going to think less of you because you can't commit to a path. And one, that's a mess. Two, that's not how education works. We learn in different ways all the time. Our path is not determined by a strict set of rules, although that's more of an AD&D thing, I will say that. But it's determined by, a large conglomeration of knowledge you collect at the time, and at which point you become you, and then you pass away. So it's really weird. I do not like it, and it makes me uncomfortable. I also, because like the thing is, to gain that, the best thing you can do as a foreigner walking into Zahara, and we've talked about how a lot of what's written so far seems to be dedicated towards foreigners, is to just stay as foreign as possible, which is a mistake. And I don't think that, to be fair, for this, compared to a lot of what we've said before, I really do think this was born out of just sheer ignorance and maybe like a confusing mix of two different rules that don't necessarily mesh together well. That doesn't excuse it, right?
Yeah, I don't know what the intention is, but the result is that you would mechanically be better off being foreign and staying foreign.
Mm-hmm.
I am extremely uncomfortable with the fact that they've basically applied a mechanic to classism. It's something that will become like a lot more evident in when the book actually goes into the very overwrought and pointlessly complicated way in which this is done. Mm-hmm. But basically, like, yeah, D&D has a classism problem inherently because it basically just copy pastes from medieval European sort of social structure and just like plonks it into its fantasy world and doesn't really do anything to examine the status quo that creates in people's heads. So to see not only that replicated and then plonked into a setting with brown people, quote unquote, but then to just like overly mechanize it in this way to the point where you literally have like a score that tells you how privileged you are, which is not utilized in a way that is good in any sense, I think is very problematic and prescriptive and limits who your characters can be. Like, they say your station can rise and fall and everything, but from the way you operate, like within the confines of the station you are currently in, I think it's incredibly limiting for players and basically just means you're doing a whole lot of maths instead of having RP and conversations.
You like maths?
I like maths. I like maths a lot. But so I think, okay, I was trying to formulate what I wanted to say, and I think specifically on the bit about the multi-classing and the multiple careers, I'm not, my thoughts on it aren't 100% complete, but it feels like it unintentionally mimics how historically and even in modern days we view the difference between, say, folks who have resources, who are elite within the society, whatnot, learning a bunch of different things as hobbies because they can, versus those who are lower class, those who are working class, those who are poor, learning a bunch of different careers in order to survive. And one is looked down upon and one is looked up upon, right? That whether that feels like what's getting mimicked here, in that, like, oh, if you learn a bunch of different careers, your station is lower. Whereas if you can just commit to one specialization because you can, your station is higher. Yep. I don't think this is one of those things that's intentional, because it's a thing that is still prevalent in our society today, and a lot of people don't examine how we sort of, like, we're starting to get more and more discussions about like the difference between learning things as a hobby and learning things as work, and, you know, freelance economy and all that, and that's a whole nother topic. But a lot of people don't really examine the difference between our bias towards folks who work a bunch of jobs versus our bias towards folks who do a bunch of things that could be jobs as hobbies because they have the resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Well, I wanted to pick up on specifically the line there that, while they're allowed in play, multi and dual class characters are uncommon in the Land of Fate. They tend to confuse those who are comfortable with the orderly nature of life in Sahara. And that actually feels a little bit like it's part of the exoticization of the setting. It feels a little bit to me like this is something I've noticed a few times in this text. It feels like there are some things that are thrown in there just to be like, aren't they so different and different? And like, unlike us, cosmopolitan folk who are more willing of people to change careers and do all of this kind of stuff, they are more rigid. Now, the challenge that I have with that, or one of the challenges I have with that, is my sense seems to. I'd love to see how people who played this, especially back when, reacted to this, because my sense is that most second edition AD&D games just became murder hobos, and one of the things murder hobos do not like, random. What was it? A stack of stats wandering from village to village with no background, right? It's like no ties, no family, no friends, and they just they're like, and so my sense is like that. One of the reasons why players, my sense is that one of the reasons players really liked second edition AD&D is that it kind of gives them that power fantasy of like, yes, I can just wander from, like, I'm a heavily armed stranger wandering from town to town picking up loot, right? You get to play through that. And I'm not sure how this, just as a general mechanic that constrains other people's reaction to you so much, and it constrains your own play, would have played, because it just actually seems like not fun personally.
Yeah, I honestly think that if most people probably would have just like not used it, because it's so ridiculously restrictive when you start reading how it works mechanically, and just like takes so much time to figure out how to hold a normal conversation with like a shopkeeper. It's yeah.
It, especially because a lot of it is like, normally when it comes to stuff like this, I'd say some people probably ignored how to use it, but kept the number around just for like mental math, saying, this person's above this person. But a lot of this stuff is pretty obvious. Like, a ruler would be above an elemental mage. I don't think that's surprising. I don't think you need to be told that. But AD&D has a tendency to use, I'm not going to say more, use a lot of stats, because in the beginning, D&D itself wasn't necessarily as roleplay heavy as we now assume it to be. A lot of us come from like more modern age gameplay, where we're not just heavily roleplay focused, but there's an active desire to see even more of it in the community, and we're seeing where systems abut against that desire frequently. But D&D did start out as a war game, roughly. It's just on a personal level as opposed to an actual battalion level. And this kind of fits in with that. Like, I guess you could engage in somewhat social battles using status, like station. I'm just imagining someone rolling station now. Sounds hilarious. But like, I see roughly why they came up with this. I do think part of this also was just so they had it. How do I put this? In a lot of the setting books for AD&D, there is an extra stat. And I think that's kind of one of the ways they kind of sold it. Like, here's another extra stat to use in your game.
The thing that's unique to this setting.
Right. This is what differentiates it from the standard setting, where you're just going to be murder hobos with no constraints of law or morality on you. Speaking of it, actually, alignment is another one of those things that's routinely jettisoned from everything because it constrains player agency, and nobody ever likes to play with it.
Yeah. Well, it also, I feel, sorry, Mariam, I feel prevents your characters from developing, because you're like saying, and yes, they say you can move up and down in station, but like, it feels very restrictive of like people playing characters that get to like go on a character arc and grow as people.
Mariam? Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Mariam. Yeah. So just taking a very quick look at the dice equations and all, and I know we can get into averages and all, and I'm not going to get into that, but it already has an order if you look at the static values, because with one dice, the lowest score is always going to be a 1, so it's the static number that kind of ranks everything already. And it's like, you kind of already have orders and stuff like that, and it's, some of it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, I have thoughts on the math, and we can get to it in a second. I guess the other thing I real quick want to talk about with the like multi-classing thing is I think there's an element. I could be wrong, but most of my knowledge of how societies work historically is this feels ahistorical in that no one really ever does one thing because you can't really get away with doing just one thing. Like even if your one thing is farmer, you're probably doing a million things to keep the farm running, right?
Mhm.
You're probably a merchant and a farmhand and a farm organizer and like doing manual labor and also like running your house and only at like really higher specialized tasks like merchant are you probably doing one thing, and even then you probably have a bunch of skills on the side to help protect yourself and stuff like that.
I mean, I kind of want to. I want to in a second just get into like how mechanically this would like get you in trouble a lot. But before, I have a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor today is mathematics, the backbone of the world. You probably need to know at least some of it. Math. Sorry, I had to.
Get
I'm
out of
terrible.
here.
On behalf of Asians Represent, Math is not a sponsor of this podcast. Going back on mute.
Thanks, voice of God.
Good Lord, I'm getting in trouble. One of the things that really is difficult here is because at the end of this little section that we are really examining, let me just say, many Zahadans feel that a change in career is acceptable, but belittle those who could not commit to a path completely. As a player, as a PC who has stats and gains levels, there is no, your DM may allow it in certain circumstances, but there's no real way to say, I stop being an Ajami and start being a Shahid. You just start multi-classing. That's how that works. That's what that means. But that is, and even though you can commit to the path of Shahid from now on completely, you still start off as Ajami. So you'd still suffer the negative consequences of that, which is a problem. Mechanically speaking, like outside of the racism and the classism that a lot of this has, and let's be frank, it does. Mechanically, this doesn't work. It just doesn't. That's the thing that really bugs me about it. I find it not just restrictive, but a bit haphazardly done in the way that it does not mix with the regular rules of AD&D, nor does it mix with the rules applied already to the world of Zahara. So it doesn't function the way people want it to. And that's a game design thing. That's not necessarily like a critical read thing, but still, like I feel that's important. I think sometimes this, and it's not always, I'm sorry, it's not always a bad thing to have like a shtick. A lot of PBTA games, for example, have a shtick. They have one shtick that differs from the rest of the rules that you get with Powered by the Apocalypse. A new thing that helps intrigue people into a new setting. I don't dislike that. That's a normal thing, but it matters how well it's done. Or if Amr's writing has 50 shticks, yeah.
So actually, real quick before we continue reading, because I think like talking about some of how the mechanics intersects with the like Orientalist and other aspects might be worthwhile. But I wanted to point attention to the thing that Miriam mentioned, which is the station table on the right, that if you're looking at the screen, you can see. A lot of the classes are given station in some combination of a die plus perhaps a static value. Sometimes that static value is an implicit plus 0. I actually think this is a really interesting thing they did. Like I have disagreements about the specific implementations, but in terms of like their use of the dice to show which classes have, I'm going to the math corner, everyone look away. They use, for certain classes where the station can be more variable, they use larger dice, like 1d6. For classes that have more consistent station, they use larger static values with smaller dice. That is just decent design. And if you're designing a game, you using the variances in the dice and the static values to portray the sort of, like, I can look at this and guess what all the stations of the characters are roughly meant to be and how the society views characters. Like, so let's ignore all the problematic aspects of station we just talked about. If we just treat station as a general, here is how on average people see sorcerers in this world, right? I can look at this and go, okay, sorcerers have a decent station, but sorcerers seem to be more driven by their actions because they have a 1d6. So you could be in a random position based on what you've done in your life. However, it's pretty clear that a beggar thief is seen lowly, and we can talk about the classism aspects in there, but it at least conveys the thing effectively, right? So, you know, that's a cool math thing. Math corner is gone. We can go back.
I will say that while you might be able to look at that table and do that, I have a hard time with it. But I kind of see what you mean now. Like, I mean,
yeah,
like I'm seeing, looking at Desert Rider, for example, and it's a 1d6 plus 4, and that kind of makes sense because sure, there would be people who would be desert riders. I actually don't know what that means, but they could go in station sort of from minimum of 5 if you roll a 1 and a d6 up to a what's the math on that? 11? No, 10.
10.
Right. So it's like, okay, there's more variability, but they're roughly in the middle of the thing up to like pretty high in the hierarchy, I guess. So I kind of see what you mean there. Yeah, like Corsair is 1d2. Sure. Yeah. Thank you.
And like if you go down all the way to the bottom, Imam of Temple, the worst station Imam is at a 9 and could go up to an 18. And that makes sense because Imams are always going to have some sort of level of respect in society.
But they're different from a village priest.
Yeah. Which
And
tells you
I'm being
something interesting about the world, right? I don't know what the distinction here is, but it tells you that village priests are slightly lower on the like religious hierarchy than Imams already, if you're looking at this.
I mean, I'm clearly reading into this text, but I'm thinking sort of more specifically about Hakims versus, Imams a little bit. And
the most, I think, interesting thing here, and this kind of ties back into like the classism, is branded criminal is the only one that can start with a 0 because they have 1d2 minus 1. Everyone else starts with a minimum of 1. So if you're branded criminal, you could start with absolutely no station.
So
it turns out critical math is a thing.
But here's the thing, that's wrong in one case. I'm so sorry, because no one's going to want to hear this. But technically, this slave could be a branded criminal, and thus would have a lower, and because they use the lower station of the owner station minus 1d6, or whichever is lower of their own station, technically speaking, they can also have a 0, or they could even have a less if the owner station is a 6. Yeah,
I think it's minimum 0. I think they hard cap it at 0. So if you subtract it, it goes up. But yeah,
I mean, they could also have,
So I mean, on that note, do we want to read the next section, use of station?
Yeah.
Okay, so just so people get a sense of because there's a few examples in there, so that people might get a sense of how it's supposed to play. And so, Ammar, would you please take us away?
Yeah, use of station. Station determines a kind of social pecking order. Its greatest use is in simple role-playing situations. Characters of lower station are expected to greet those of higher station first and to treat them with deference. To do otherwise is a great insult. Certainly, no favors will be won while ignoring the protocol of station. A poor merchant of station 2 defers to a successful thief of station 5, even though most merchants are of higher station than the thief and would not be under the same requirements. I'm sorry, did someone swap L5R into our reading? Station may also come into play when the DM makes an encounter reaction check using table 89 on chapter 11 of the DMG. Individuals of higher station may modify the roll 1 point in their favor for every 2 full points of difference in station. For example, imagine that Rashad, a successful adventurer of Station 12, is surrounded by insistent beggars of Station 2. Rashad tries to threaten them off, brandishing his weapon. The DM rolls against table 89. The result is a 7. The beggars are merely cautious. However, Rashad's station improves the result by 5. 12 minus 2 equals 10. 10 over 2 equals 5. Rashad looks especially intimidating. The beggars free. Should I keep going, or do we want?
I think like we're getting a bit into the weeds. And not in a way that like is easy to critically parse.
But yeah, I mostly wanted there to be an example, more so of
there's a lot in this section. I'll just say that like as a dyscalculaic person, I think this is really bad and also really badly written because I just like the amount of freaking ridiculous maths it's making you do just to have a conversation with someone, I think personally is just like so unappealing in a game for me. I don't know if anyone agrees with me, but just like I really hate that aspect of it so much.
I come from it from a slightly different angle because like I can enjoy this much math in a game. As someone who has written a lot of math things and taught math classes, this is not structured in a way that conveys the things easily, especially to anyone who has dyscalculia or just generally struggles with math, right? Like even I'm good at math, I process math in a different way, and this would take me a minute to like fully get through. But that's
I was also very good at math in general, and I'm like on 3 reads, I finally am beginning to understand what this is, but it's not expressed in a way that is easy to follow. I feel like a flow chart would have actually been really helpful here for this.
I've thought that about many games. So flow chart would be really helpful. Sorry, please continue.
overall, like I find that this is just it's a bit too much. And the reason why I'm saying that is because of how this is going to be processed. Now, we've discussed this before, but your average player is probably not going to read every single inch of this book. So you have the book trying and honestly not really doing it well, trying to explain it to the DM, who needs to explain it to every single player and probably will have to do so multiple times. Is that written in such a way that allows for that flow of information to be easily transmissible? And the answer is, to be frank, from my perspective, I am not a rules editor. I am a sensitivity editor, but from my perspective, no.
I think that's sort of okay.
Oh, that's it. That's
okay. I think to sort of bring us back on track, I think there's two major things to note here with regards to sort of a sensitivity read and deconstruction. One, they establish a clear hierarchy that is very common in Orientalist texts, though more often applied to East Asian Orientalism, right? Which is why I made my comment of when did someone sub in L5R here, because they talked about how station monitors every single interaction. And to an extent, and I'm sure, actually I want to defer to Ahmed in a second to talk about it, because station does matter to an extent in conversations between folks in a lot of Middle Eastern cultures, but normally it is not a number that is floating above our heads that we can see someone's station and know how to interact with them. But we generally, there's general interactions, and that's just general code of conduct that kind of exists in pretty much every society, right? Of how to deal with folks who hold some sort of station or position of authority versus you, etc. Parental-child relationships, etc. And I'll defer to Ahmed to talk about that in a second if he's got stuff to say. But real quick, the other thing I wanted to point out, the one example they use of the station mechanic in the midst of all the math is using your station to threaten a bunch of beggars.
Yep.
And this is kind of getting into all the stuff we're talking about with how the station system is used to enforce classism. They just that's the example. All right, Ahmed, I'll hand it off to you if you have something.
All right, so much like any other culture, the concept of classism exists everywhere. However, just placing it as a mechanical thing, I am absolutely against it. It's really annoying to even for the DM to deal with it, to add this math, to check whether the character is higher status than a beggar. Do you really need math for that? I don't get it. We do have classism in terms of, we still have it in terms of lineage. It's more where it comes to play in our culture, at least in the Arabian culture. But it's just the way it's used right now in 5e, where it's not mentioned anywhere, and the DM is just winging it as a situation. That's the right way if you want to handle it. Don't write about how the ruler of a city is obviously of a higher status than a beggar. You don't need to write all these things. These are all common sense situational things. Just leave the DM to figure it out. If they don't want to use it, they can just remove it.
The only time I've honestly ever seen this done well is when they use it specifically as a currency and you're talking amongst a bunch of people in a court. Right. And that's a very specific circumstance that this wasn't built for. I am going to do a side thing, and I think the more I read it over and over, the more it's important.
Before you do the side thing, can I jump in with a quick thing on please, off of the previous two people? I just wanted to underline something that Ammar kind of said, somewhat in passing. This kind of stuff exists in all cultures, right? There are status hierarchies and there are things like that. The only catch is, one of the lenses I've been using on this work is, how would this have been written if this was a medieval European setting, which is basically what default fantasy is. And the thing is, at that point, the class stuff is sort of, quote, invisible to us, right? Most of us, not invisible, it's invisibly legible to us. So obviously, a peasant is less than a squire, is less than a knight, is less than a, whatever priest, is less than a local feudal lord, less than a king. We just kind of know that because of our kind of cultural upbringing, whereas this is trying to mechanize something that wouldn't be invisibly legible to somebody. But yeah, I'm going back to exactly what Ahmed said, right? Did you need to do that? Maybe just leave it. Maybe just let people kind of try to get a sense of that by trying to figure it out. Sorry, Adam, please go ahead.
Do you mind if I quick interject before your side tangent? I think to add on to that, I think it's worth noting, when we're examining this text, why is it in here and not in the core is an important question. And that's what kind of Ammar is getting at, is like, it adds an extra sort of layer of like, oh, sure, classism exists everywhere, but it's particularly important in this setting, right? Here's a mechanic that makes it more important. That's what you do with your game design. All right, Adam Lee.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have a little discussion about the word imam, because it does not only have one definition in Islam. So I rarely talk about what sect I'm from. I think I've mentioned on stream once, but I'm a Shia Muslim, which is slightly different than a Sunni Muslim, the biggest difference of which is often attributed to the death of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and the leadership decisions that came out. That's what caused the initial schism. On one side, the caliphs were formed under Abu Bakr, who was the first caliph, and then the imam on the other side, one imam for Shia Islam, who was Hazrat Ali, the nephew of Prophet Muhammad. This conversation honestly kind of stresses me out.
Yeah.
In any case,
Cousin.
Yeah, cousin. Thank you. I should trust myself, is what I'm learning. Regardless of how that schism came about, for quite a lot of Shia Muslims, for a long time there was one imam, and then there was no imam, and in some cases there still is an imam today because we have our own sects. It is a line of hereditary leadership. Regardless of your feelings about that, the point is the word imam has a lot of power to Shia Muslims, and it has the same kind of power the word caliph has. In fact, in many occasions, the caliph and the imam were the same person, including for the Ismaili sect, the Fatimid Caliphate, the imams and the caliph were the same person. To use the word imam without any form of description, and to also place it, I see why they did it, but to place it as just the imam of a temple, it does a couple things that really do upset me. One, it suggests that the imam is less than the caliph, which is a very biased point of view. I get why that would happen, especially if you've only been exposed to Sunni Islam. But still, it does hurt. And sometimes talking about sensitivity means to just talk about what hurts. Also, if you're going to use such a heavy Islamic coded word, because even to Sunni Muslims, that's still an Islamic coded word, why aren't you using the term in English, mosque or masjid? And more importantly, why are you including this at all when Islam is not a part of your setting? Because Islam is not a part of, this is the same problem I've had with the word caliph. Islam is not a part of the setting because it can't be, because not only are there multiple gods walking about, but there is no unifying monotheistic kind of force. The religion in Zahara has not been depicted anything close to Islam, but it uses Islamic terminology almost as if they were equal to cultural terminology, which they are not. Just because Islamic culture is Islamic does not mean that all Islam is cultural. Some of it's very religious and very important to the people practicing that religion. I really don't like the use of the word imam here. It really does upset me on a personal level. In addition to that, there are so many other words that could be as easily applied to this, both in English and in other languages, because they've been shown to draw from more than just Arabic in the naming of certain titles. So it's one of those things, as a sensitivity person, as a sensitivity reader, this is one of those things that I would immediately red flag. If you don't have, specifically in this case, if you're not talking about Sunni Islam, why are you calling the leader of a temple an imam? And why are you referring to it as a temple? Where is that coming from? And the answer usually is, well, I'm trying to flavor it a certain way. And I'll be frank, if that flavoring comes at the expense of religious groups, I do not respect it. Yeah, and this is, again, the same problem I had with the word caliph, even though I'm not Sunni Muslim, because that's still a very important religious signifier. I would have the same problem in multiple other cases, especially from a perspective that is very Western, rather Christian, and designed for people who are brought up in that cultural system. Anyway, felt like I need to say it. My apologies.
Thank you for sharing that, because I know that caused you a great deal of discomfort. So I appreciate that. And yeah, that's one of those things that, well, I mean, there's two things there. Obviously, that's amongst the kind of things that when people say, well, you know, Al-Qadim is just kind of a made up thing. It's fantasy. It's got nothing to do with real life. It's like, yeah, it does. It's got all this other stuff in there, even though it says it's not Islam. It's sprinkling that in like little exoticizing flavor or something. And that's kind of challenging. Any other thoughts on this before we move to the next section?
Yeah, I just want. Sure,
go
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
No, I just want to add just one more. Like linguistically, imam means someone who is a religious leader, or someone who is like a very specialized person in knowledge and science.
Mhm.
Like, however, this is never a word you can ever use in a setting to signify a religious person, because it is specifically for Muslims. It's hardly ever used anywhere else except for Muslims, between Muslims. Even when you use it for the other users, it's used among Muslims. It's like, for us, it's like using a pope. Like, why is there a pope in Forgotten Realms? Or or having a cleric with a cross? Why would they carry a cross? It's one of these things. So I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
And it's sort of expanding on what you've said and what everyone else has said, is that in conversations with people who have never met another Muslim or interacted with another Muslim, and sort of ask me questions like, oh, so who's your pope, or who's your whatever, they have trouble wrapping it around their heads. And this is from a Sunni Muslim, like, you know, as I've also learned that there is an imam for those who aren't Sunni. But for me, like, there's no centralization of religious power. It's from a everyday person and my personal experience, you have multiple religious people with different titles who do different things. You have the imam, who in my experience was the prayer leader, the caretaker of the mosque, you know, the closest thing to a priest. You have the sheikhs, who are religious scholars, and that title is very specifically given because they've done scholar work or have learned big bodies of work. Then you have the qazis, who are married, like they're essentially JP, like justice of peace sort of a thing, in terms of they deal with marriage contracts and those sort of domestic things. So there's no centralization of power that is being put here. And for me, my little kind of hang up is, why is priest and imam two separate words for something that, at least in semantics, is kind of the closest thing for me. This is my personal experience I'm speaking from. So I've learned that that's not the only use of it right now. But like, for me, it was just like, why are you using two separate words for kind of a very similar thing?
Yeah, I do want to I guess emphasize or mention here that this is what Mariam just mentioned there, that particular dynamic of trying to understand a thing that is very different from the thing you know, but using the structure and the lens of the thing you know is Orientalism. In fact, that is exactly what Edward Said wrote about in I think the first chapter of Orientalism, specifically around when early European Christian folks were trying to get a sense of what that whole Islam thing was over there. They often refer to it as the Mohammedan heresy, because they were like, okay, so you think that Muhammad is like our Jesus, right? So you think he's the son of God rather than Jesus, who is the right son of God. Therefore, this is a heresy rather than being a completely different thing. And so that's like so deeply Orientalist. And it is like classic Orientalism, going back to, it's like textbook Orientalism, literally from the textbook.
that hurt my soul. I know you meant it. I know why you said it. Wow, that was like, oh, shot to the heart. Oh boy.
I just no.
I mean,
Jesus.
there's a whole lot of writing about Islam from like early American writing and late British Empire writing where they refer to it as Mohammedanism because it's Christianism, right? You name it after the person who founded it. So a lot of, if you want to look up Islamic like what early Americans thought of Islam, because Islam has been in America since the start. I know, shocker to a lot of you. Actually, a lot of it was erased forcibly as part of the slave trade because a lot of Africans were Islamic and they were forcibly converted. But that's a separate topic. But a lot of the writing you will find will not refer to it as Islam, but as Mohammedanism, because that's how they understood it within their Orientalist framework.
And the phrase, what is it, bringing the mountain to Muhammad thing? Just, I don't know why, just like, makes me...
There's a couple others as well. Like Saracen is a good indicator. If you're looking for specifically Turkish Islam, during the medieval time, the word Saracen was the word used, which is why, by the way, you find they're ex-Muslims, they've converted, but you find ex-Muslims in Knights of the Round Table. There's two of them. They're Saracens. Isn't that fun? But yeah, like, it's this constant need to try and define us without asking us how we wish to be defined. That is a huge factor in exotification and specifically in Orientalism. Because no one asked us how we care, how we feel about the word imam when this book was being written, right? And to a certain extent, that's acceptable. To another extent, there's always been Muslims here, and there was, like, I can name at least 3 different major migrations of Muslims that happened before the 90s. Like in the past 3 decades before the 90s, at least 3 different major ones. So they were there. We were everywhere. We weren't that hard to find. There were ex-Muslims too who would know a lot about the culture, even though they are no longer part of the faith. But instead, like too often, they went to an academic source who turns out to be a white person who reads white written text. And even if you're the best person in those circumstances, you're going to get major things wrong, or you're going to exclude major things, because historical basis is not cultural knowledge. They're not the same thing. Without that sort of like context, it's really hard to understand what a word that just could mean roughly leader has in terms of a spiritual significance to a certain population, right? Because you'll see a bunch of people called imam, but a bunch of people are called, father in Christianity. It's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, the fathers are really good. Yeah.
Yeah. The weight carries is carried in a different place. And unless you have the cultural context, you wouldn't know it. This is one of the reasons why sensitivity editing and sensitivity reading, and possibly most importantly, cultural consultation is so important when you're trying to draw from these stories and you aren't necessarily part of them, or even if you are. It's always helpful to get someone who have a similar perspective, a similar cultural basis, but yet a different perspective than you, one or the other, because you can try and tackle things from 2 sides and achieve something a bit cooler as a result.
Mariam, would you like to read the next little bit?
Yep. As noted, Station is essentially a role-playing tool. It is of little use in combat, against monsters, or against bandits and others who attack first and talk later. They have no interest in etiquette. The same is true of genies. To most of them, a mortal is a mortal, although many noble genies do show a higher regard for mortals of significant station. Station also means little to intelligent creatures who do not interact with normal society. For example, a Rul doesn't care about station, though an elf usually does. Furthermore, station is not the only factor that defines a person. To most Zakharans, station is ultimately less important than ability, and ability is ultimately less important than honor. Do I keep going?
Please do.
I'm sorry, they did it
Please do.
again. They undercut the importance of the section they're currently
Yep.
in by saying
Yeah.
it doesn't matter again.
Yep,
And now they're about
that's-
to tell you why it really, really matters.
So the
And-
whole
and-
hour we just had.
And that's why I'm trying very hard not to laugh while reading every word.
I think keep going. I think
Please
there's more.
keep powering
Yeah,
through.
yeah.
Okay,
There's more
in
here.
in groups with mixed stature, such as adventuring parties, the station of the group's spokesperson applies. The spokesperson is simply the character who's talking at the time. Okay. For every apparent interruption by a companion of lower station, the spokesperson's effective station is reduced by 1. If an individual of higher station interrupts, then that individual suddenly becomes the spokesperson. Those of greater station command more attention. If characters of lower station interrupt the new spokesperson in turn, the -1 penalty still applies. The DM should use his or her best judgment in assigning penalties. Merchants and other NPCs tend to react badly if 5 individuals all talk, ask questions, or give orders at once.
So I will say one thing.
Ooh.
There is it is definitely a pattern of behavior I've seen. If someone is talking and someone else that the person perceives as higher station starts talking, the person will ignore the first and go to second. This also generally happens when a woman is talking and men start talking, and then the person will start looking to the man. So there is some why do you want this new role-playing game? But I don't know what I'm going with
But
that.
this is just.
I have to
this-
point.
Sorry, Mariam.
I have to point that on one hand, they could have saved 3 words by saying them instead of his or hers, and at the same time, they use a gender neutral noun for the group's spokesperson.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they were being paid by the word. So
I think we've talked
Sorry,
about his or
that's
her
fine.
enough at this point.
Yeah.
It is
Yeah.
good that they're starting to use more gender neutral language here, because there was a lot of gendered.
Only when they don't mean to, though.
Yeah, there was gender dichotomy earlier, and we haven't seen it as much in Station. There is a little bit in the bit about how to calculate a spouse's station, and generally from everything that we've seen is probably implied that
women.
the spouse is going to be the woman because the man has their own station, but that's not as explicit as in some of the other places.
in a
So
head
that's-
couple.
Yeah.
I
So I have a lot of feelings about the way this mechanic is presented, because basically this station mechanic is just a how privileged are you mechanic, which there's numerous ways that is problematic and bad. But so it basically bakes that classism that's already very present in fantasy into the game as a mechanic that players are being told to use to navigate the world that they're in, and it's not doing that in a way that really examines or critiques social power structures and what that does to people. It's just sort of handing it to you as fact. And I feel like within the context of a role-playing game specifically, they say this is a role-playing mechanic, it's not. It hinders roleplay completely, because it presents the idea of and scope of social roleplay in a way that's just really reductive. And you're just not role playing under the system, you're number crunching based on how much class privilege your character is perceived to have versus the person who then interjected into the conversation. And it's just convoluted and boring and unnecessary, as well as perpetuating a harmful status quo, in my opinion.
I also
Sorry.
Sorry.
Just one more thing, which is that a lot of the aspects of this, sort of ignoring the inherently classist aspects, a lot of this is just charisma, which already exists as a stat, and it also then messes with charisma, because if you want to play a character of low station who has high charisma and might naturally end up becoming the face of the party because of that, because class doesn't necessarily mean you can't persuade or negotiate or deceive others, then that becomes a mechanical detriment to your party, which limits what your D&D party can be and do. So I really don't like that this is here like this.
I have to say that because this is one of the earlier iterations of D&D where it was primarily a war game with some role playing in between, sort of this was meant to be if you don't know how to role play, here's a mechanic to somehow force you to role play, but not in the role play that we have come to know, which is a lot more improv and a lot more kind of collaborative than okay, what do we do after a fight? Well, gosh darn, I don't know.
Would you like to? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, to quickly bring it back into like an Orientalist framework, right? The aspect here that is introduced is a really strict framework for social interaction that, from a role-playing sense, limits it so really only one person is talking in any social situation. But from an Orientalist framework, it also strongly defines how social interactions take place all across this region, right? It says that in this region, social interactions are always between the two people with the most authority and never anyone else in any group situation. That is a very limiting and simplistic view of how social interaction works as just humans.
There's one sentence I want, like, I agree with everything that's been said so far. There's one other sentence I want to add to, just because it heightens the many noble genies do show a high regard for mortals of significant station. So we've already talked about how station seems to be way too apparent to be functional, because if someone's dressed the same, roughly the same as you, how can you tell if they're of a different station? But regardless, calling them noble and relating that to being more aware and more respecting of station, again, conflates this with morality, right? The more good this genie is, or the more like respectable this genie is, which is another code word, the more they'll respect the fact that you are of a high station or a low station. And the problem with that is it once again puts this into this framework where often when people talk about honor in Asian cultures, in Orientalist frameworks, they conflate honor with morality and turn into this weird pseudo stat that kind of governs everything we ever do and ever say, and that's related exactly how much to how good or bad we are. It's extremely biased, and it kind of, yes, this is AD&D, and a lot of AD&D was very dichotomous. There is one and there is the other, but that reinforcement is especially dangerous when talking about cultures that are unknown to the author or less known, especially Asiatic cultures, because of the heightened sort of dichotomy Orientalism often provides. So,
Mariam, do you finish that paragraph? I'm trying to remember whether we started laughing too hard and didn't quite finish it.
I think I finished it right up until just before In the Tales of Arabian Nights.
Okay, great. So does somebody else want to pick that up?
One quick joke before we pass on. I honestly think Station would have been funnier if monsters also respected Station. Just like you walk into a dungeon and just like all the skeletons look, wait, no, that person's too high station. Not finding that. Okay, who's the high station spokesperson?
I'm sorry, this is above my pay grade. We're just gonna shuffle away now.
I would love it if it was somehow reverse. If it's like, oh no, that's the most important person in the room.
Kill
Only
them.
attack that one. So yeah, I'd love to read from here on.
Please. And I believe you're next in the initiative order.
I love me some initiative orders. In the Tales of the Arabian Nights, station usually remains with one from birth until death. One may gain great temporal power, wealth, and prestige, but at the heart, one remains a warrior of the desert, or child of the streets, or the son of a baker. And this is obvious to those who know how to look. The reverse is also true. For example, in the legend of the talking bird, a girl and her two brothers, all newborns, are cast into a river by their evil aunts, who claim the children were not human. The king's gardener finds the infants one by one and raises them as his own. They are clearly of great intellect and pure of heart. Before he dies, the devoted gardener builds them the finest country house he can afford. Years later, when the king happens to meet his children as young adults, he's quite taken with their superior bearing. Their wit is clever, their features comely, and their manners impeccable. Oh dear. Yet the king is drawn to them in a way that cannot solely be explained by their virtues. He soon discovers them to be his own children, for who else could they be? No matter what their upbringing was, they remained clearly the princess and princes that they were. It's not impossible to rise from a lowly station to one that is great, however, far from it. In the story of Aladdin and his magical lamp, a poor, lazy boy, supported by his widowed mother, becomes a prince with untold riches. The key to his phenomenal metamorphosis is more than a magic lamp whose genie answers his every command. Aladdin matures into a kind, generous, and brave young man who truly loves the princess from whom he acquires all his riches, just as she truly loves him. The Land of Fate, characters who are honorable and kind at heart may enjoy a storybook ending too. Oh, that's nice. Especially if true love and the Hand of Fate are on their side. At a minimum, however, they can hope to be better off than they were yesterday, if that is their goal and their desire. I will say one thing before letting others speak. That last paragraph does make me very happy. I was very happy to read that.
That's nice. I don't love how the book tries to justify its bullshit classist mechanic with a story about bioessentialism.
Yep.
But what do we expect from D&D? I don't expect any better. And then kind of contradicts itself with the Aladdin story. Like they still keep doing that thing of contradicting the exact thing they just wrote and not presenting it as like, this is just different ways in which the world operates. It's just like, I don't know, it seems to be framed in this really weird way where they constantly do it. Sorry, we've talked about this before. I'm not going to go on and on about it. But yeah, it seems like it seems like they're trying to justify the weird mechanic they've written themselves into with this nonsense story about a king knowing that his children are his children because, you know, they were born to a king. So obviously, no matter what their upbringing was, they must behave as they would if they'd been raised by him. It's nonsense.
Yeah. Any other takes on this little bit before we do sort of more general reflections on Station so far?
Whose turn in reading is it?
I do find it like bad that this is a common habit of the book to constantly contradict itself, not only with these two stories, but even with the sentence, this is obvious to those who know how to look, referring to Station. The reverse is also true. I'm not going to speak to motive. I feel like that's a bit disingenuous in this case, but it sure does read like you're trying to fill up space.
I also think it's like this weird way of, we're not telling you how to do stuff, but also you can ignore everything that we tell you, but also don't.
Also, does Arabian Nights have to be like the only reference they have?
Yeah, that's what I was saying in the chat. Finn the Bin said, the moment this section started with in Arabian Nights, I was like, oh no, that is so many sections of this book so far. It's their one and only reference material that they directly cite. And I'm imagining that they are like reworking the stories a little to fit the D&D book. But like, yeah, it's getting really tiring, just like the constant references to Arabian Nights and nothing else. They think they're being really clever with it, but I don't think they are.
That's actually a good point. So we talked about the Bond of Salt, and I distinctly, because I'd read a bit ahead, and I contrasted that with the actual story. And there were a lot of significant departures. So I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case here too. Overall, I think this book wants to be two things. It really does want to be like, let's play Arabian Nights, which if that's really your goal, sure. But it is so caught down. Yeah, it's so caught down in Orientalism, even more so than the Arabian Nights, and essentialism and classism, that so far it reads like a racist textbook and not like a wondrous land full of magic. And this is something I've had, this is a repeated thing I've said, but I want to restate it as many times as it appears for the sheer sake of this book. I would argue did not necessarily complete its mission as the first book in a series. Overall, one good paragraph, and I will argue that last paragraph is very good, does not undo several paragraphs of quite bad. It is not okay to say, but you know, you're exempt from this terrifying stat, and say, so therefore there is no racism or Orientalism in this at all. It's extremely classist. And this is actually a conversation that we've had on this channel multiple times before, but especially on the wrap-up, the Tasha's Guide to Everything wrap-up, Cauldron of Everything, my apologies, where we sat down and talked a lot about how just giving like people the option to ignore something does not necessarily make the original thing better. The fact that this pops up directly after referring to it in deep context multiple times in this book, notwithstanding, it's a trait that D&D seems to have had for multiple iterations ever since first edition, and is dangerous to its core. And I think as we talk about how D&D needs to continue to evolve, that's the thing to keep in mind. Undercutting yourself is not the solution to getting rid of racism. Getting rid of racism is.
Thank you for that. That actually seems like a pretty good in the way of reflections. Any other thoughts on the station section? I think probably we won't have time to read a bit more. Unfortunately, we're going to have to take up improving and losing station next time.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So any general thoughts about station or this section?
I just think I mean, there's obviously more to come, but so far, for me, it's very boring, and it's like unnecessarily complicated and boring, and it's also harmful. So again, I question why it's here. It adds to that feeling we've spoken about a lot before of this book placing a lot of unnecessary restrictions on the people who are supposed to be playing in its setting, and it also detracts from the fantastical nature of what is supposed to be a fantasy setting and isn't, because it's literally just a bunch of racist tropes. And I feel like this mechanic in particular is very ripe for sort of people at the table playing together, replicating some really harmful classist tropes, like the whole thing of the most privileged person gets to speak, and if you undercut them, then it's hugely harmful, and all this stuff. I can just see it leading, like many of the other mechanics, like the sort of, frankly, the honor killing stuff in the first chapter, like leading to really uncomfortable situations at a game table, where sort of uncomfortable situations are created because of things the book has encouraged people to do that they walk into sort of either unknowingly or not, but it's still creating that harmful situation.
From a world building perspective, of which I do a lot of, what all of this is an attempt of some sort of social currency, and that's something I kind of am working on in my own projects, because I do want to play with this idea of social currency where you can modify it, but at the same time it helps set the base at which NPCs would interact with you. And the only thing I'm learning so far is don't. I know there are ways of doing it, hopefully in a sensitive way. This is not it.
Yeah, I definitely. I mean, this is something that you mentioned as well. This is something that kind of stands out to me about this. Is like, this is all so early RPG game design here. This is something Maria mentioned earlier, that they're trying to figure out. They're trying to figure out how to mechanize this thing, but like basic AD&D second edition doesn't really kind of emphasize or really support role-playing as an important element of the thing. It's more go kill that monster over there in this dark dungeon. And so an attempt to do that, I think, yeah, misses the point a bit. And I don't think it does sort of a great job at it. Eventually we've got better games for role-playing now, but at that time, that's what tabletop role-playing game design was about. It was about math. Sorry, there's a lot of math. A lot of the math didn't make sense. I just started for the first time, I'm playing second edition AD&D actually, and I'm realizing, one, it's not actually a system. It's like 8 subsystems kind of glued together with duct tape, or joined together with duct tape and a dream. And so like some of this stuff just kind of doesn't really make a lot of sense and then also the way that they look at role playing and they try to mechanize it is a bit like how they approach how to mechanize combat, because you could always just have done it narratively, but instead they kind of go like, okay, I do like X motion, I do a slash versus versus like a jab versus a thing. Like they really try to do this kind of mechanization, which we with our more modern sensibilities kind of go, that's weird. You're trying to tell a story, so support the story, not try to mechanize the like minutia of it in order to try to capture the effect of what you're trying to do, which is basically simulationist design versus narrativist design.
And I think that it would be interesting to work on design of social currency in some sort of a game system. It's just it's very hard to do it without including a lot of your like your biases that can be classist, racist, sexist, and all the other is.
Definitely. Okay, I think that might be it for what we can cover today. Yeah, we've been hoping that the rest of the book would move along a little faster, but it seems like there's still lots of problematic content. So, and yet more to cover in next time when we get into improving station and how to lose station. So we're doing this every third Saturday of the month. We've been doing this for some time, months, years, I don't know, feels like years.
There is no time anymore.
That's
We're
right.
immortals.
Yeah, there is only Blur's Day. It's the only day.
Definitely. So maybe we can go around, and actually I think maybe Adam Ali, did you want to plug a specific thing, this session ZeroCon I've been hearing about before we do general?
We've got not a major announcement, but we've got a cool announcement for ourselves, and we also really do want to plug Session ZeroCon, which is a con from our friends in the RPGC community or the RPG Southeast Asia community, featuring tons of incredible Asian creators and game designers. I'm gonna quote from their Twitter page because that seems the best, right? Session Zero Online is an online convention to help showcase Filipino RPGC and Asian game designers, artists, and crafters on January 30th, 2021 at noon to midnight GMT +8, that's UTC time. You need to sign up on a form located on their Twitter page, so check out Gamers and Gaming Meets. You'll find it there. You can sign up right up until the 29th on midnight, I think, UTC, so reserve your slot as soon as possible. There's some incredible people there. I hear one of the admins for Asians Represent's going to be there, but shh, don't tell them I said that. Actually, multiple of them are going to be there. I'm super excited. We've had a whole wrap up about it, so if you want to check out our YouTube channel to hear more about that convention, it should be coming out Monday or Tuesday. As for us, in general, the Asians Represent Discord is open to new members. We have about 25 spaces available. Daniel should be linking that in the chat right now. Yes, Session ZeroCon is free. That's important to mention. But if you click that link, you can come join our community. And yes, lurking is perfectly fine. Come chat with us. Come lurk with us. Come play games with us. We're a big old community over there, and we talk more than just Orientalism, I promise. So hang out with us.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think Daniel Kwan is going to be guesting at that too. Is that right?
Sorry, I don't know who that is.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No,
Who? What?
What? Oh, hey, Daniel.
I've heard Daniel Kwan is going to be doing a panel there with Steve and Agatha on streaming and media in TTRPGs.
Yes. Steve and Agatha.
Steve and Agatha will be there as well. It's going to be wonderful. Session ZeroCon, I cannot stress how interesting that's going to be. They have actually created a virtual convention space that you can go to. You have a little sprite, and you can actually walk around a convention space like you are at a con. And what's really neat about it is that, if you don't want to be like overwhelmed by all of the conversations that are happening, you can actually adjust your sprite's social interaction distance and space in that con, so that only people who are, perpendicular to you can actually talk to you at the con. Or if you want to have a group conversation, you can actually open up your social interaction bubble in the con to meet like several lines and this grid outside of you. It's really neat. There's also going to be vendors there, so you can actually do like online indie TTRPG shopping at this con. It's going to be a really neat experience. I've walked to their con floor as a demo, and it's really neat. I can't wait.
Fascinating. Yeah, no, I'm just definitely very much interested in that.
It's like a convention, but it's also like a video game. It's super cool. Sorry,
fair enough.
It's like a video game, Adam Ali. Okay.
It is.
So I think we can
Stardew
sort of
Valley, but a con.
Yeah, wonderful. Let's continue the reverse initiative order, and starting with Ahmed, if you
Oh,
could tell.
I think Ammar has a story to share. as
After
we-
plugs.
After
I'll
plugs.
take us out with
Okay.
it.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. Great. Yes, to take us out as often you've done that. Ahmed, please, describe yourself and where people can get in touch with you and follow your work and stuff.
You can find me at Mr_Jabri, and you will find me also tomorrow doing my Zahara Retold with Safiya. We are reading the other books of Zahara and just cleaning it up, picking whatever we can actually use for my future campaign. So hopefully we'll finish the book tomorrow.
Wonderful. All right. Amr, please, where can people
Okay.
find you, and what are you up to these days?
Yeah, I'm Amr Emraz. Currently, I'm not up to a lot. I'm doing some writing stuff. All my stream stuff is currently on pause. You can hear me on a couple of podcasts, I think. Primarily right now, the Moon Harbor Heroes podcast, and also the latest episode of Rollout, where we play Anyone Can Wear the Mask, and we tell a really cool superhero story. It's a lot of fun. I enjoyed that one immensely. Other than that, yeah, I do TTRPG writing, game design, slowly working on a bunch of projects. That's it from me.
Exciting. Mariam.
Hi. So you can find me on Twitter at media_junkie. That's where you'll hear the latest of most of my things. A lot of my streaming currently is on a break, or will be starting up shortly, probably in February. You can find me on Utopia, where I run a Surzabine campaign show called Kahania. You can also find me on the Musafirs, which is on a very long hiatus, but hopefully we'll be back soon. And I do a lot of writing. So if you want to have me on a stream as a cool player or GM or whatever, or you want me to write stuff for whatever cool game you're writing, call me.
Awesome. Adam Ali, where can people get in touch with you and follow what you're up to?
Well, I mean, the easiest way to do so is head to a social media platform, type Werewolf Feels. You'll usually find me there, talking about being a werewolf and having feelings, because I have a lot of them. I am a TTRPG writer and streamer, so the quickest place you can get the two projects I've worked on that are coming out soonish are Mnemonic RPG and Jiangxi, whose first draft is already out. So if you back that, you can download the files right now. I am in the scenario book. I wrote a scenario for that game. I'm very proud of it. Feel free to check that out. I've got some projects in the work. I'm in 2 streamed games, only one of which I can talk about is the second season of The Burnt Bunch is coming back on Off the Table in February. The other one I cannot talk about because, surprise, surprise. I'm also in 2 podcasts. Sorry, 1 podcast, not in 2. Don't listen to me. Just the one. Just the one. In February, you can find me in Off the Table / Salty Sweet Games podcast, Missing Annie Lee, which is a Fear Itself actual play. We are super excited. You can still back us on Ko-fi. We've got all that information on the Off the Table and Salty Sweet Games Twitters for some cool rewards, including a kind of like a movie style poster of all of our characters, which is great, even though I've got to send in a description of my characters ASAP. So those are the first places you can look for me. I'm always in the mood for more work. So if you want to contact me, feel free to slip into my DMs, so to speak. I would love to write for you, or cultural consult, or sensitivity read, or really anything.
Iza, please.
Hey, I'm Izza. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Evil Clever Dog. You can also subscribe to me on YouTube at Evil Clever Dog. What a surprise. I'm a cosplayer and a designer, as well as a TTRPG streamer. And on YouTube, I make videos about cosplay and crafting and design and all that kind of fun stuff. I just released a video where I make the Stygian blade from Hades out of foam. It's very fun. We all love Hades.
I figured that'd be a plug for you, you know.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a very high chance of me going on the Supergiant Games website and buying that t-shirt after this, now that I've seen another person I know has bought it. Very susceptible in that way. So yeah, go find, subscribe to me on YouTube, and you can watch my new Hades video. It's very fun. You can also find me on a couple of streams, starting on Monday on Chromatic Chimera. Season 3 of Quest the Soaring City is back, and we are a Quest affiliate show. It is a really cool streamed game where we sort of deal with the aftermath of a revolution in a flying city. It's very fun. That'll be on Chromatic Chimera, 6:30 EST, 11:30 GMT. And I also stream with my friend Finn, who's in the chat right now. On Wednesdays, we play Pokemon Soul Silver together on her Twitch channel. It's twitch.tv/FinnTheBin. So if you want to just come hang out and play some Pokemon with us, like, come join us there as well.
That's fantastic. I'm Ammar. I'm one of the hosts of Asians Represent, and I'm one of the cast members in Dungeons and Asians. So you can listen to that, which started off as a D&D actual play, but we switched it over to Quest as well. I also want to do, so you can find me at Amarajaz, most easily probably through the @AZNS Represent Twitter. You can also find me on Instagram at the same, I think it actually has a number zero after my name there. You can find previous, and I also want to give a big shout out to Daniel. Daniel brought us all together and has been producing these, and is a tour de force in the tabletop role-playing game community, and a true friend of mine. It's our friendship is one of the things I cherish most about my life. If you want to watch previous episodes, I know, right? There we go. If you want to watch previous episodes, catch up on previous episodes of Al-Qadim, our sort of reading stream that we've been doing, the critical read stream so far. You can catch previous episodes as well as this one on Wednesday, I believe, on YouTube. Just search Asians Represent. That's probably the fastest way to find us on there. Reminder: we do this every third Saturday of the month. So we'll be back in February on the third Saturday, whenever that is.
February 20th.
Now, I think Ammar has a quick story. Daniel, do we have a few minutes to cast
Oh
this,
yeah,
or
of course we do.
Just
Just a heads up, the next Al-Qadim read through might be a charity stream. So the weekend of February that this is scheduled for is actually the same weekend that Asians Represent is going to be collaborating with Lily Sparks to do a Lunar New Year charity weekend stream.
Oh, very cool.
So we might be doing something there. So it might be a charity stream. Maybe we'll do something different with this crew. Who knows? Because
Al-Qadim charity
Like a
game.
one shot of Al-Qadim, folks.
I love that.
no, we
both
can't do
went
that.
to the
But
exact same
Ahmed
place.
won't be there.
February the 20th.
20th is going to be it's going to be a part of a charity weekend that we're going to be doing. So
Awesome.
Just keep an eye out. Follow Asians Represent at AZNS Represent on pretty much every single social media platform except for Twitch, where we are AZNS Rep.
Away.
All right.
Please take it away.
So, as I have done a few times whenever is relevant, for context, there is a character in Middle Eastern / Islamic folklore called Goha, the wise fool, Nasruddin, a bunch of other names. Is sort of a Sufi mystic and also like the wise fool jester type archetype. And there's a variety of stories. And there's one that I think is relevant today. So one time, Goha went to a rich man's party. He gatecrashed it. He was attired in sort of disheveled clothes that were like really messy, and so the waiters immediately took him to their corner and sort of served scraps reserved for them. The next week, the rich man held another party. So Goha gatecrashes it another time, but now he's dressed up in his fancy clothes, looking real formal and regal. And so they thought he was one of the guests, and they escorted him right towards the seat next to the host. He was served the best food, the best chicken dishes, best desserts. But however, all he ate was a couple of bites of bread, and he stuffed the rest into his clothes and his sleeves. The host was confused and asked, Goha, why are you stuffing all the food in your clothes? And smiling, he replied, I'm feeding this rich food to my clothes since they deserve this more than I do. My worth was already established last week.
Funny. That's good. I like that. That's clever. That's a good story. Thank you. All right. Thank you so much to everybody who's catching this live and everybody who's watching in the on demand afterwards on YouTube. And we'll see you next month on Twitch on the third Saturday, which is the 20th. Bye. Take care. Be safe.
No, first
Bye.
Friday, we're taking over a wrap-up spot now. It's ours.
Yep.
False.